Hi, I'm Christopher Warnock of Renaissance Astrology. Today I'd like to talk about the Tower of the Winds and how to use traditional sources to free your mind with regard to talismans. So kind of interesting, I think, topic, but let's plunge right in. Basically, you know, I talk to lots of people about talismans. Lots of people are, emailing me or calling me or whatever, and they have lots of questions. And there's some sort of basic pop ideas that not everybody has them, but I hear them a lot. And one of the most frequent is this kind of idea that talismans, when we're talking about talismans, we're just talking about pendants or rings. And so, as we're going through and talking about these various sort of pop ideas, I'm not trying to say that they're wrong. I just want to say, look, this is not the only way to fly. A lot of these things I maybe disagree with, but it doesn't mean that you can't follow it. It just means, hey, realize that there's other ways to look at it, and in fact, there may be a more expansive view. And like I said, it may be an opportunity for you to sort of free your mind and see all the infinite possibilities and the incredible creativity that can manifest with talismans. But at least what you're doing is you're not controlled by your unconscious views anymore, but you made a conscious choice as far as how you're going to approach talismans and think about them. So let's just start off with one of the ones I find really interesting, and this is not only pop but sort of academic, is that there's a difference between a talisman, an amulet, and a pentacle. Now, to me as a practitioner, from a practical standpoint, this seems to me to be about as different as cars, autos, and automobiles. I think that a lot of the idea that there's a difference comes from the fact, well, they're different words, therefore they must be something different. And also, certainly academics love to sort of pigeonhole things and classify them and write them all down, and this is this and this is that. But again, it seems to me that as a practical matter that what we're dealing with all of these are objects that are imbued with magical power. And again, hey, if you want to say that, fight to the death that there's a difference between an amulet and a talisman, that's fine. I'm just saying that there's other possible views here. And what I will say, though, is when you're talking about talismans, amulets, and pentacles, that really does seem most synonymous when they're used to describe magical pendants. Okay? And, as we talked about this earlier, there is a sort of predominant view that a talisman is a pendant. And, I do also get people asking me about rings, so it extends to that. But just think about it. Let's look at our traditional sources and see, test that as far as was this the only view traditionally of what a talisman was. Now, obviously, you look at Picatrix, you've got magic mirrors. So mirrors, you can think even of the sort of popular, fairy tales and things like that. Mirror, mirror on the wall. Obviously, that's an idea that's existing in traditional sources, both in sort of a fictional sense, but also in a practical sense, whereas Picatrix gives actual instructions on creating magical mirrors. But, this is not the only example. I mean, think about Excalibur. I mean, you can think about, there's all sorts of magical objects that are powerful. So, I mean, this is something that, again, you say, hey, wait a second, we could even go further than just a pendant or a ring. But why even just stop at objects? Again, if we look at Renaissance Europe, we have the example of talismanic murals of gardens and houses. So, one I want to talk about in a little more detail is an example of talismanic building. And this is the Tower of Winds that still exists to this day in Athens. It's believed to have been constructed by Andronicus of Cyrrhus about 50 BC. It's over 36 feet tall. It's an 8-sided tower, and each of the 8 sides has a relief that is dedicated to one of the 8 winds. It also has sundials, a wind vane, interior water clock. So obviously it was being used for sort of weather astronomical observation, which of course at the time would have also included the spiritual and magical and astrological side, because those were not separate in the classical period or again in the Renaissance. According to a 17th century Turkish source, the tower also had an astrological dome that had 12 signs, and then each of the 7 ruling planets was engraved within the appropriate sign, as well as having a magic mirror, Mirror of Alexander, that was said to reveal enemy armies. As soon as they started on the march, they could be seen in this magic mirror. And then also, the tower contained hundreds of astrological pest control talismans, really giving a full range, comprehensive protection of the city against all sorts of pests, rats, fleas, all sorts of stuff, as well as the plague. So it's very interesting. I mean, we have here an actual physical example of an astrological talisman that's an entire building. And then in fact, we have lots of these examples of astrological statues or talismans that rather protect whole cities from pest or even gave protection to whole areas or provinces. Um, we can see this in Thabit Curus de Magibus. It has a variety of different talismans to both aid cities and cause destruction and death to cities. So obviously we're dealing with something that's got a much broader possibilities. Really the original talismans were not, as you can see from Thabit Curus de Magibus, were statuettes. And that sort of blends in with the cult statues of deities in temples. And in the Corpus Hermeticum, they discuss God making, essentially, which is calling spirits, angels, or gods into statues in order to create magical effects or to have communication with them. So we're seeing here this is part of a much larger, more complex process, and the possibilities are really quite incredible. So really kind of one of the most amazing examples, and this doesn't have a physical example for like the Tower of the Winds, but this is contained in Picatrix. It's in Book 4, Chapter 3. It's a discussion of the great city of Adassantine, built by Hermes Trismegistus. Now, this entire city was apparently built, according to Picatrix, on using astrological magic. Has four gates. Each of the gates has one of the essentially an animal on it that's astrological that no one could enter. That was thinking to do evil, so it's like a security gate in a sense. And all sorts of astrological sort of talismanic buildings surround it. And then at the summit, it says of the citadel, Hermes Trismegistus caused to be built a certain tower, which just like the Tower of the Winds, which attained a height of 30 cubits. And on the summit of it, he commanded it to be put a sphere, the color of which changed in every day of the 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, it received the color it had at first. So again, it's planetary, as each of the 7 days, of course, of the week is explicitly astrological. So every day the city was filled with the color of that sphere, and thus the aforesaid city used to shine every day with color. And around that tower and circle, water abounded in which many kinds of fish used to live. And around the city he placed diverse and changing images, by means of which the inhabitants of the city were made virtuous and freed from sin, wickedness, and sloth. So this is an entire sort of vision of a city that is full of magic and in a very positive way. So these are really quite incredible examples, I think, of non-pendant talismans, really kind of expanding the range. But even so, it might seem that from our traditional sources that they're limited, even these kind of amazing city talismans are limited to sort of magical effects. In other words, to say we're going out and changing the external world and often trying to have material effects, and we're trying to get these external factors to sort of conform to us. We want to get what we want, make people do what we want, or make the pests go away or whatever. But again, these traditional sources are pointing us to a broader view and broader possibilities of what's possible or what can be done with talismans. So the magic of Adassantine indeed repelled pests, which again you can see that as external, but it's also transformative in a positive way of the citizens, inspiring them to be virtuous, again not to be slothful, and to be good people. And I think that this transformative effect of talismans is one that's often overlooked. For example, if we get a Venus talisman and we're hoping that a particular person is going to fall in love with us, or our ex-girlfriend or boyfriend is going to reconcile with us, I think we're likely to be disappointed. And even if we're successful, isn't there a sense of overpowering the person there? I mean, that they're really not following what they would normally. I mean, is that what we want for love? Someone's going to be sort of forced or coerced, or we've again, use the power. Now, we're not thinking that. We want them desperately back so much, but really, if we're objectively thinking about it, is that how we want to obtain the love for ourselves? What this approach overlooks is this transformative and spiritual power of Venus acting upon us, making us more full of love, more loving. It's a very transformative and positive effect. It's more subtle, but in the end, I think this is a more positive and more powerful effect, and it's certainly something that we're not going to have really any ethical qualms about, that we're trying to make ourselves better and improve ourselves. So I think that, when we look at our traditional sources, we can step out of a lot of sort of restrictive boxes of pop ideas about talismans and free our minds. The creativity that's possible and the possibilities, I think, are really kind of incredible. And also we're opening ourselves out of the sort of self-oriented view in terms of just trying to arrange things the way we want it in the external world, and looking at, again, a possibly more spiritual approach that's more transformative, that can still have very positive material effects. So again, check out The Tower of Winds and many other translations of traditional sources on the Renaissance Astrology website, and free your mind.